So hey, listen, thanks for coming. Obviously, it's been a bit wet outside, and I think actually we've got some new faces in from the first talk, so that's nice. Sadly, some of those people went home, so we can't have everybody. If you were here for the first talk, you'll see how hugely complex running a live game is from a QA point of view, from an ops point of view. Perhaps that's what scared some people off. I don't know, but we're here to talk more about what it is in terms of developing for it and designing for it. So, who actually knows who KIXEYE is? And the employees cannot put their hands up. Fantastic. That's actually better than I imagined. So, KIXEYE is actually a San Francisco company, founded in 2007 as Casual Collective, and basically was in at the beginning of Facebook casual games. So really browser-based gaming. That's where KIXEYE made their name. Particularly to begin with Desktop Defender, and then on to Backyard Monsters, which really sort of got them on the map. Then Battle Pirates, War Commander. So pretty much dominated Facebook a lot of the time, even though you may never have heard of KIXEYE. I know at one point Battle Pirates was the #1 grossing game on Facebook. And I know even with VEGA Conflict, we were a top 20 Facebook game when we were just on Facebook. So there's a lot of success there, even if it's not necessarily high profile. But who is KIXEYE Australia? So yes, KIXEYE Australia, actually based in Brisbane. My God, a game developer in Brisbane, it's incredible. So essentially the company was founded here in 2012, and it's kind of a mix of new hires and industry veterans from various studios that sadly no longer exist. So a bunch of us come from THQ and Pandemic and Three Blokes. I'd say, most notably, it was really the end team of Three Blokes that rolled into being KIXEYE. The Three Blokes team had done some online strategy games. When that all ended, basically got in touch with KIXEYE in the States, and they went, yeah, we'll give it a punt. And initially, the whole premise was make Battle Pirates in space. So that's how VEGA Conflict came around. And as was mentioned in the earlier talk, it was originally called Galactic Pirates. Internally, it still gets called Galactic Pirates. There's a lot of things that are difficult to change. But apparently, that's a better name. So it's an MMORTS, a massively multiplayer online real-time strategy game. So the company was founded in 2012, and our closed beta started in 2013. So that's a pretty quick time to market. And we're currently live across a bunch of different platforms, and we're localized in 12 languages. So we've kind of been busy. It was our 4th birthday last month, and you didn't send a cake. I'm disappointed. We're up to about 45 people here in Brisbane. Again, that's actually quite astounding, particularly if you've never heard of us, but it's good news for Brisbane. So, who are the guys standing up here? Well, it does sound like a very bad joke. A Kiwi, a Ukrainian, and a Scotsman walk into a bar, but that's actually what it is. So Don looks after design, Artem looks after tech, and I looked after development, production, the studio, and between us we spent...
milk.
And milk, absolutely. We do talk a lot about my title as VP of Dairy. Somebody's got to make sure there's milk for tea, and that's me. So, we've spent decades working in box product before this. So we made games on the PlayStation, on the PC. I'm of a particular vintage where the first games I wrote were actually distributed on cassette tape, which gives you some idea of how old I am, given that you've probably only seen a cassette tape in a second-hand car. But then we moved to live games, and that's where it's at now, really. So massive change, massive change. So, what makes live games different? Don?
All right, so, well, the main thing about live games is that you have a whole bunch of players who are already playing your game. And when I mean a whole bunch, I mean a whole bunch. So that comes with a bunch of, well, I'm not going to call them problems, just things you have to be aware of. So we've got them up here. Players have existing expectations about what your game is. You might make a decision early on in your game, and I think anybody here who's made a game and published it probably has that moment where they look at the game that's gone out and they're going, you know what, I kind of wish I'd done that bit differently. The thing with a live game is that you have the same thing. You look at that and you go, I really wish I'd done that bit differently. But you've got a whole bunch of players out there who are playing your game who will say, no, this is the game that I bought and I love and I'm playing. It has to be the way that I'm used to. Even though you as a developer are sitting there going, it could be better. The other one is existing ownership. Now, originally I was going to say existing purchases because, talking free play and that sort of thing. But ownership goes way beyond just spending money. So anybody who sits down and plays a game, particularly a game where you construct anything at all, it makes it theirs. Now, I mean, as a completely aside example, how many people here are familiar with Star Wars? Okay, cool. More than two. So how many people here were around for the release of episode 1? Okay. How many people here thought episode 1 was awesome? Okay. So the thing there is, people who grew up with that franchise or who were fans of it, the original movies, the books, the toys, I'm sure the colouring in books, the action figures, all those things that you probably remember from your childhood, all of those establish a level of ownership so that you yourself become invested in that particular brand. You internalise elements of it, and so then when the original creator goes ahead and builds something new for a new audience, he didn't ask you, okay? He just went ahead and made something new for a new audience. And so your immediate feeling is, well, hey, I'm a massive fan of this franchise, and I've taken this, and you've gone and you've changed it in a way that makes it, from my point of view, not as cool. So, and that's a problem. So suddenly you're in this position where, well, hang on, where's my Star Wars? What is this? What are these midi-chlorians doing in my Star Wars? Get them out, right? So ownership is really, really important. Players who play things, they build things, they engage with the game, they make the game theirs. And the moment that it's theirs, it's not only yours as a developer anymore. So you have to account for that. And coming back again, also talking about old design choices, you will get those situations early on where you might have done something fairly quickly or just sort of like, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to get it out. It's a live game. You're stuck with that. And you can change things. You can change things, but you have to take into account all of these elements when you do change it, because change is disruptive, and disruption causes players to be a little bit unhappy with you. So, talking about players, community is a key thing you'll get with any game that's live. Now, I'm just going to stop here for a minute and say, today I don't think you can actually make a game that isn't going to be a live game in some form or another. The days of putting a game on a disc, shipping it off and being done with it, they're over. All right? It doesn't matter if you're making an MMO or you're making a mobile game or you're making Fallout 4 or whatever it is you're making. You're going to have to deal with a community, you're going to have to deal with ownership, and you're going to have to deal with ongoing support. It's what everybody expects these days. It's the world we live in. So this actually applies not just to people making MMOs. This applies to pretty much everybody. So community versus players. So community, I'm talking about your Facebooks and your Instagrams and your Pinterests and your Twitters and everybody who's part of that vocal community who talk about your game, who talk to each other, who post, who want to get involved. So just quickly, I've got a bunch of numbers up here as potential percentages of the total user base who form up your community who will talk on all these various different environments. So does anybody want to hazard a guess as to which one of these is the correct percentage of your users? Anybody? You're going to go with 5%. We've got one person on 5%. Anybody else?
5.
You're going with 5% as well? Anybody else?
20.
20%?
I'll go with 1.
Congratulations, you are the winner. About 1%, if you're lucky, of your users will be all those people who post on forums and all that kind of thing. And that is the same pretty much for any of those games. So you jump on, say, the World of Warcraft forums and you look at all the activity there. That might be 1% of their users. It probably isn't. And you can see how much conversation will happen there and how much happens. But you've got to keep that in mind. You are talking about a tiny, tiny percentage of your users. And on top of that, they're also the ones that are the loudest. So the ones who have the most to say, the most opinionated, and often they are nowhere near a representative sample of your users. They are a representative sample of the users who like to be heard. So don't get the two confused. And they will get angry, they'll get excited, they'll get bored. Angry players and excited players are kind of the same thing. I talked earlier about ownership. when you do something to their sense of ownership that changes sort of what they feel, they will get angry with you, and they will express that in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they'll do it on the forums. Sometimes they'll be quite creative within the game itself. And the same is true when they get excited about something. When they're excited about something new that's cool, that they like, or that they're anticipating, or whatever, they'll get, there'll be the same kind of thing. The dangerous one is bored, because bored players won't actually usually talk at all. They'll just go silent because they haven't got much to say, or they'll just sort of go along for the ride and might, rather than being the person who really, really wants to draw a giant cock in your game, will be the ones who just like, well, somebody else was drawing a giant cock in the game, I guess I can help out. Right. But they're the dangerous ones, because bored players are apathetic players, and apathetic players are players who'll probably just turn around and leave your game. So I'm going to pass over to Jon at this point to talk a little bit more about how change works in games and what kind of things you can expect when you start messing with that sense of ownership.
Part of what you get is that fantastic user-generated content back there. We had a lot to trawl through when we were looking for pictures to put up there. People are very, very, very creative. So change, the whole thing of managing a live game, as Don said, is that change is good. It's good for us, it's good for the game, or it's scary, or it's awful. And you'll get all of those things on the forums when you change the slightest thing. So I'm going to go through a few examples of this. And the reason I'm going through it is because it actually affects the business. So design is not on its own. Everything has to feed back into the business. So as you know, we started out as a social game. We were on the web, on KIXEYE, we were on Facebook, and basically when we started, the game was written in Flash. All the servers are server authoritative, it's all secure, but the actual game client was in Flash. So you'd load up a web page, go to VEGA Conflict, and there you'd be, playing the game in Flash. And that's how it looked like. That's what it looked like when we started, pretty much. What do you think? Looks like a Flash game? Yeah. It was actually a pretty good Flash game in terms of all the stuff that was done with it. But it's still a Flash game, and Flash games have that kind of look. They also have a bit of a performance issue, and especially if you're running on a Mac, I don't think it particularly likes it. But that's what we were. And look, we were pretty pleased with it. We sort of got this game out in less than a year. I think it was about 9 months it took to get from nothing to a closed beta, which for a massively multiplayer online game is pretty good. Again, still waiting on that birthday cake. It was a good effort. It was certainly a lot quicker and actually far better quality than anything KIXEYE had done before. But the market was changing, and we wanted to move to mobile. Who still plays web games? The silence is deafening. This is why we made the business decision that we needed to move to mobile. It's where the growth was really happening. We didn't want to kill off the web game, but we had some problems. Flash doesn't run on mobile. Apple very, very famously made sure it didn't. It did for a while. You could run Flash on Android, but the performance was dreadful. So we looked at Adobe Air. Pro tip, don't look at Adobe Air. It's awful. That wasn't a solution for us. So, to go to mobile, we really needed to rewrite the game client. Now, the benefit we had was that because the game's server authoritative, the servers didn't have to change. All we had to do was write a new client. Just rewrite the entire game client. That's all. It's easy. So we looked at a bunch of different options, and because we really wanted to focus on mobile, we went with Unity. Not a massive surprise, right? There were a few issues around that. We didn't want to close the web game because we were actually making money. Money's good, by the way. Pays for milk. Also pays for salaries, but, whatever, priorities. But it brought us some entertaining sort of problems because we didn't want to have to try and maintain two code bases. So if we had the web client in Flash and the mobile client in Unity, you're making two games, even if they're talking to the same server. It's a huge, huge undertaking. And we also wanted to keep all players together. At one point, there was a thought from corporate that, maybe the mobile version is different. Maybe it's a different universe, different client, and it's all fine. But that's something that we really didn't like the idea of. It's a massively multiplayer game. Why shouldn't everybody be together, regardless of what platform they're on? That's the ideal. So that's really where we decided to go with it. So for a while, we had to maintain both code bases. We actually split the team, and we had half of the team building the new game client in Unity, and half of the team carrying on with the existing game client on Flash. It created some problems for us. We weren't able to create as much content for the game. So, the business wasn't running as well, but we were investing in the future. We put several months into it. It was rough and ready to begin with. We introduced it to some players early, but we launched the game with a Unity web client. And it kind of looked like that, which I think looks better. What do you think? Yeah, looks nice. The planet rotates in the background, and there's all sorts of effects. What could possibly go wrong?
Everything.
Good man. So all we saw, from our point of view, as developers and publishers, was great advantages for our players of taking the game to Unity. We could support high resolution displays, we could do a proper full screen mode, we could actually use all the hardware in the PC or Mac, better frame rate, audio, particle effects, shaders. We could use real 3D models, for God's sake. And we could then take it to mobile, which was a real key business proposition. The disadvantages for our players, all they had to do was install Unity Web Player. What could possibly go wrong? Funnily enough, they didn't universally love it, which was a bit of a disappointment to us, I have to say. But it's kind of interesting why. So there were players that would get in touch with us and say, I don't have to install a plugin, it might be a virus. So well, kind of Flash is a plugin and probably more of a virus than anything else you've got on your computer, but okay. I don't trust Unity. Back to Flash again with the hacking and stuff. I can't install a plugin. I play on my work computer. I play in, an internet cafe. That's good, interesting. It doesn't run on Linux. What? So we had a bunch of players who would be playing the game on Linux, which to us, it was never anything we supported. It was just like, okay. But they were cranky because we took this option away from them, and they had ownership of this option of like, oh, Linux, you're screwing us. Also had people who said, oh, but it doesn't run on my laptop anymore, my 10-year-old laptop that runs Windows XP. And it's like, well, we didn't officially support that laptop, but I actually had players get in touch with me and demand I buy them new laptops. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. So we had all this feedback from the players. Again, we talk about how many players are vocal and how many are actually doing something, and we'll get to that with analytics later. But for the business, we did switch off Flash, and we did lose some players. That was a very real thing. There were players who, fuck you, KIXEYE, you've killed Flash, I'm never coming back. And they didn't. But we did launch on mobile, and we gained a lot more players because the market is so much bigger. So essentially, it was a good design decision for the business. It was a difficult one because of the player feedback and because of the noise, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. And now mobile makes up a far higher percentage of our revenue. Massive, absolutely massive. Also going to talk about another change we made, which was visual. So because we started out as a Flash game, we started out with graphics. It was all 2D bitmaps, absolutely everything. There was nothing 3D in the game. And it was designed for a high-resolution PC monitor. It was nice 13-inch laptop, was pretty much our minimum spec. So you could be guaranteed, a 1366, 768 display. It'd be pretty clear. Jobs are good. So all the graphics were designed with that in mind. They were pretty high detail. They're pretty high noise level. You can't see it so much there on the projector, but if you look at the slides afterwards, you'll see there's a lot of fine detail. But that's not great on a handheld device. When you're sort of sat there with something like an iPhone 4S, which was our base spec for mobile, that doesn't really read too well. So we call that Exhibit A, the original player base. So we wanted to try and address that, make it read a bit better on mobile, given that we saw that the future was mobile. So we went in and we made a change to the base, try and make it a bit more bold, make it read better, less kind of fuzzy at a small size. And we have Exhibit B, our player base. What do you think? Does it look better? Does it look worse? Getting a thumbs down there. Tough crowd. Coincidentally, we then have Exhibit C, the carefully considered player response. What have you done? The bases look like hamburgers. We got a lot of pain on this one, a huge amount of pain. Players were not happy at all. And it was It was and it wasn't a surprise to us, and it really links back to what Don was talking about. Players own their bases. They've put hours into this game, and this is their property. We vandalised their bases, and they wanted to tell us about it. They were angry, they were passionate, and they were vocal. I don't think that's when they did the cock and balls, but they were very, very angry about it. We got a lot of pain on the forums, we got a lot of customer support tickets, and there was a lot of screaming, like, what are you doing? You've ruined my game. And it shows how players are passionate about your game, even if you don't think they are. So on this occasion, we changed them back. It was the best decision for the business. It was an easy decision to make because it's just a bitmap, you know, as opposed to maintaining Flash, which was a massive undertaking in terms of time, cost, QA. Changing a bitmap back, yeah, we can do that. So we did that. It was for the good of player sentiment, and it's all forgotten now. That kind of leads into where Don wants to talk about with angry players.
All right, so obviously there's a few nice examples there of players getting annoyed, to put it politely. I wanted to just highlight that an angry player and an angry customer are not the same thing. The problem is that if you jump onto any forums or anything like that anywhere, you will often see a lot of your players who are of the firm opinion that they are the same thing. You know, I'm a customer of this thing and I think this, therefore I should be able to get this, how dare you, I've got a legal case, whatever, right? The thing is, an angry player and an angry customer are two, like I said, they're vastly different. Angry players are angry because they love your game, okay? And in fact, the anger is usually directly resulted to that. They have ownership of it, they're passionate about it, they firmly believe that they own probably more of it than they actually really do. And so they will get angry at change, at the way that you've decided to tackle something and all that kind of stuff. And in many ways, the louder that anger is, the more passionate it is about that thing. So sometimes you do have to just sort of like roll with that, like with the bases. At other times, you have to recognise that you've got to make those business decisions, and your players don't necessarily know what's best for the long-term health of the game. They will tell you that they do, but they don't necessarily. The other one, though, is an angry customer. So an angry customer is somebody who feels betrayed by the service that you've provided. Now, service is the key word here. All of these games, in fact, I think, coming back to what I was saying before, any game that you release these days essentially takes the form of a service. So you are entering into an agreement with your players to provide them with this entertainment media, and with that comes the necessary support and logistics and all those kinds of things of making sure that that experience remains current, remains good, is stable, addresses their concerns, and all those kinds of things. Continually feeding in new content, all those kinds of things. It's a service. And if that service breaks down at some point, that's when you get an angry customer. The angry customer is the one who's spent some money and didn't get what they were expecting to out of their spend, or the one who's had something that they've invested in and taken away from them, those kinds of things. Angry customers are something you have to address. So having some thought to how you're going to handle customer service is important. And again, considering the huge percentage of your users who are going to participate in your forums, it's a good idea to have some idea of a customer service approach that isn't dependent on your forums or your review board. So having a customer service email that you check regularly, that kind of thing, at least that, so that you actually have a route for the players who aren't your forum posters or your community members to actually be able to, you know, talk about their problems with your game. And you will probably find, you'll be surprised at how many people will use that avenue that has nothing to do with the rest of your community or even are unaware of it. So for anybody who's doing that, understand that an angry player and a customer are not the same thing. There is a really easy way to tell on the forums when you've got something that is indicative of a large group of angry players as opposed to a large group of angry customers. If they come in and they yell about something for about a week, and then they kind of go quiet, or they end up actually then arguing in the defence of the very thing that they were attacking 5 days ago, then they're angry players. And they were angry because it changed, but then they will quickly accommodate that change and then will become your advocates. If the conversation continues in the negative for longer than about a week, instead you've still got people complaining about it sort of 3 weeks, a month down the line, and the tone hasn't changed, you're probably dealing with a large group of angry customers at that point. So then you need to think about how you're going to address that. And in some cases, addressing that can literally be a case of going, well, that segment of customers, we're just going to have to leave them alone. As is the case with when we moved over to Flash. There was a bunch of customers that we lost because they were angry customers because they could no longer play the game through the platforms or whatever that they were used to. And again, sometimes you need to make those hard decisions. You're never going to please everybody, so don't try. Now I'm going to jump in and go slightly sideways at this point to talk a little bit about player psychology. I know there's a whole big game dev talk coming up on that in the future, so I'll try and keep this one light. But this is going to, the reason I want to talk about this is to talk about analytics and how you measure that, and also that coming back into anger and all that kind of thing. So this was originally going to be titled Understanding Analytics, but then I realized I should probably talk a little bit about behavior first. So first of all, this diagram up here, I didn't draw this, I stole it from the internet. It actually came from a site on perceptual control theory. I unfortunately can't tell you who did it, so sorry, YouTube camera, if you're the person who made this, thanks. So this is a quick loop showing how players, how people think, and in fact not just people, it actually expands out into non-people as well, as is evidenced by this non-person up here. So you've got this sort of this looping process of you have perception, which is obviously sort of your UI, is compared against a reference model internally, which then turns into a behaviour, which then impacts a change, which then modifies perception, and the loop goes on. You've also got, with regards to the changes happening, you've also got external disturbances, which will change the environment as well. So I really like this model of thinking about behaviour, because behaviour obviously is this one at the top, right? That's the behaviour we see. But the one we're actually interested in is the reference and comparison model, because that's the one that dictates what behaviour actually is. And since we're in the business of attempting to control user behaviour, for all those, by the way, who this comes as a shock to, that's kind of what games are. We're trying to make people have fun, and that means we have to have an understanding of what fun is and the behaviours that go into that. So we're trying to control user behaviour, which means that what we're actually doing is we're attempting to modify their reference model and their perception. Now the reason I like this particular graph is because it actually bisects in a couple of interesting ways. So you can bisect it sort of diagonally this way. So you've got the reference and the output behaviour on one side, and the perception and the impact on the other. The perception and impact are the things that happen inside the computer, and the reference and the behaviour are the things that happen inside the person. But the other way, you can also bisect it the other way. So you've got output behaviour and impact on one side, and perception and reference on the other. Where at this point it's talking about sort of what's happening, so where is the process occurring. So output behaviour and the impact all happen within the computer, and then the perception and the reference happen inside the player. So each one has its own sort of, you've got this little 4-part graph where everything sort of has its own little bit. And this one's really interesting because not only the reference model, because not only is it occurring within the player, it's also controlled by the player. So this is the one furthest away from our control as software developers, because this is neither happening inside the machine, nor is it influenced by what's going on in the machine directly. So it's only indirect, which makes it the one that we kind of want to get our hooks into the most, because the rest of them we have slightly more control over. So to talk about that, we're talking about essentially, so a reference model is your memory. So this is a short graph talking about how memory works, which actually is also a graph about narratives. So I've done 2 graphs here. One of them is the old intensity versus time, for all those who studied English lit and are vaguely familiar with that. The other one is the, for lack of a better word, the hero's comfort over time. Now, if you look at these 2 graphs, you might notice that if you look at them sideways, they look a little bit like a vase when they're put together. But one of them is quite literally a mirror of the other. Now, this part here is the interesting part right there, that trough on how comfortable the hero is feeling right before the end. So what's going on with this is we're hardwired to look for the happy ending. Okay, we all are. It's why people buy lottery tickets. Okay, so the more discomfort, that discomfort slope, so instead of the hero here, we're now talking about the player or you in your life or whatever, the more you hit these sort of avenues of discomfort, the more your brain will look for the story that does the conclusion, where it all then, and I lived happily ever after. I went and bought a lottery ticket, and then I won lotto, and I lived happily ever after, okay? This usually doesn't happen, by the way, so if any of you are thinking of running out and buying a lottery ticket, you probably won't win, okay? But the story is very, very powerful. In fact, it's so powerful that it's the thing that makes people go off and buy them. So, so understanding that this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to always, disruption causes discomfort, and what we're looking for is we're looking for those upturned stories that will turn that discomfort into, and I lived happily ever after. So we know when we make a change that we're going to make our players uncomfortable. Whether it's a new feature or changes to an existing feature or whatever, somebody somewhere is going to get uncomfortable by that and they're going to express that discomfort through anger. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are providing, at least for the majority of our players, some form of and I lived happily ever after, my comfort going right back up again, possibly even to higher than it was when I began. So this leads directly into analytics. We need to be able to measure how our players are feeling and be able to then take that and use that model to predict how we can get that happily ever after story happening. So there's a few key things that are KPIs, so key performance indicators. All those who have not heard that term before, I think it gets covered in like Business 101. So key performance indicators, these ones are really for everybody. So whether you're making a free-to-play game or a not free-to-play game or any form of game or even a board game, you probably need to be thinking about these key performance indicators: engagement, retention, conversion, and churn. Now these are slightly businessy terms, so I've taken the liberty of putting some translations to what those terms mean up on the slide next. So this is just a picture of a graph. So it's a graph. So yeah, is it fun? Obviously is an important question. Am I going to play it tomorrow? Now I've actually played myself. I don't know if you guys have, but I've played quite a few games where I've sat down and played it and gone, this is a great deal of fun. But I kind of have no interest in playing it again. It was a moment of fun, but I'm not going to play it tomorrow. So you can have decent engagement and appalling retention. That's totally doable. You can also have phenomenal retention and really poor engagement. For those games where you log in every day just because you want to claim that reward thing and the game itself you're not really that interested in, that happens too. Conversion is always an interesting one. Do I want to pay for it? It can also just mean, do I want to invest, something beyond just my time into it? Do I want to take the time out to plan and build this thing within this environment or not? Do I want to engage, in a meaningful way with this particular sub-feature? And then finally, churn is, I'm bored now, I'm off. So every game in the world has churn. Not everybody plays your game forever. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that at least every single one of you here can think of at least one game that you've played in the past that you don't play anymore. If you don't, you're weird. So this leads into the next thing that we always think about, which is cohorts. So we're a live game, okay, and we've been live for a while, and we constantly have new players joining the game all the time and old players leaving the game. So when we're measuring players, we measure them in cohorts. And cohorts get broken into, we do it monthly, so players who joined in this month, you break them down however you like, but what it comes down to is you have young players, you have middle-aged players, and you have old players throughout the lifetime of your game. Now, I don't know how many of you have made the foolish mistake of wandering into the World of Warcraft forums or anything like that to actually see what people are talking about. But any MMO anywhere, you will find somebody writing a thread of, this game is dying, everybody is leaving, it isn't what it used to be, the community is disintegrating, it's all going to end in 6 months, right? Every game, you will find one. You'll probably find one on the World of Warcraft forums right now if you went and looked. I haven't looked, so I might be wrong, but you'll probably find one within the first 2 or 3 pages on their general chat. So how many people here think that the World of Warcraft is actually going to be over in 6 months? Anyone? Right. So why do you think people would say that?
reference from there are older players that have been around for ages.
Churn. Each of these cohorts, as it ages, will shed numbers. Most of these cohorts don't look backwards. They won't turn and look at the players behind them. All they're looking at is themselves, their own group of friends at their level, and the players that they aspire to be, who are the ones who are further ahead. As the cohort ages, it will get smaller, and the cohort ahead of it will get smaller, and the cohort ahead of it will get smaller. So from that individual player's perspective, what they see is the community shrinking. They see their friends going to play other games. They see smaller and smaller number, and they'll start seeing the same names coming up again and again for the raids they want to participate in and that kind of thing. So from those individual players' perspectives, the game community is getting smaller. Their game community is getting smaller. So this forms a huge part in that key thing of, am I over it yet? And the more disruption that happens to late game players, the more likely they are to turn around and walk away. Now this is counterpointed by the fact that the longer you've been in the game, the more invested you are, because you've actually spent more time and you've built more things and all that. So there's this weird sort of counterbalancing thing. But you need to take this into account, because as players age, their community gets smaller. And in an MMO, community, large numbers of players playing together is a really key part of the experience. So you need to think about, for your elder game players, how do you take these younger cohorts and engage them with older cohorts? And lots of different games have lots of different solutions, which I'm not going to go into right now, but that's sort of what you need to measure. So this then, next thing I want to talk about very briefly is KPIs specifically for free-to-play games. I'm going to keep this one super light. So there's a whole bunch of alphabet soup here. Does anybody actually know what all these mean? Well, yeah, okay, so the people that KIXEYE do. Okay, so very quickly, just going through, ARPU is average revenue per user, ARPPU is average revenue per paying user, LTV is lifetime value, and ARPDAU is average revenue per daily active user. Now there's a whole bunch of others as well. I wanted to call out the difference between ARPU and ARPPU, because obviously in a free play game, you actually have a huge percentage of your users who just won't spend money at all. Does anybody want to hazard a guess as to what that percentage would be? If you work at KIXEYE, you're not allowed to guess.
5%?
We've got a 5%,
80%?
80%, 90%. So it's about 80 to 90% of your users who won't spend. Okay. So your spend percentages tend to be fairly small. So trying to get those people to spend is crucial. But then again, average revenue is a really important figure to think about, because average revenue is obviously the revenue you get distributed across all of your players. So if I've got 100% of my players are playing the game, I mean, they're obviously, because they're players, and only, say, 10% of those are spending, then the average revenue per user is obviously the spend of those 10% divided by the whole set, so that brings the average way down. Now, where that gets interesting is because a lot of the things you do with regards to sort of player behaviour and spending is you've got to think about, again, it's a community. So one player spending a lot will actually obviously then average out for everybody. So you've got to think about that other 80% of players, and I'm waffling a little bit here, so I'll bring this back in, as essentially content and reason for those people who will spend to want to spend. And I'll talk a bit more about this later. But at the end of the day, it's a business, so there's really only one question you actually have to be measuring. And if you're starting out at the very early days, keeping an eye on these kinds of things is useful, but the really thing you need to look at is, am I making enough money to pay for milk? Because if you're not, then you're going to have to get to like black tea. So measuring all of this kind of stuff needs analytics. The previous talk talked a lot about sort of, the specifics of backends and all that kind of stuff, and deployments and all that kind of stuff. If you're starting out, if you're a small indie developer, or you're just getting going and you've got a small thing, there's a bunch of off-the-shelf solutions that you can use. Now, some of these are cross-platform, others are more mobile-specific. The nice thing about it is that they will actually do pretty much all of that back-end stuff for you. They'll so things like sorting out the service and looking at how that data is collected and stored and all that kind of stuff. They'll do all of that for you, and you won't have to lift a finger. The other nice thing about them is that I think all of the ones that are set up here are free. You don't have to pay a cent to use them. And the reason that you don't have to pay a cent is because they take your data and they use it for other things as well. So they'll be measuring things like your daily active users and your retention and all those kinds of values. And that's information that they will share with other people for money. So if you're not comfortable with your own data being looked at by somebody else, then you probably don't want to use a free solution. But if you're just starting out, there's not really anything wrong with it because the chances are what you're doing is not going to be so wildly different than what everybody else is doing that you're actually going to have any data that's worth keeping secret anyway. What you will have to do though is you will have to include the SDK, write in all the code hooks and make sure that you're actually tracking the events that you're interested in tracking because they don't know what's important to you. So you need to think about, within my game, thinking right back to that whole structure of the curve and the happy ending and all that kind of stuff. How do I track when people are uncomfortable? How do I track when people are going back into their comfort zone again? That's on you. You need to work that out. You need to think about your game design, think about how that structure is going to work, identify those events and put them in. The other thing you'll need to think about, obviously, is if you have got any form of monetization in your game, you probably want to put some events in for people spending as well. I think some of these, like Unity Analytics possibly, and I think Joomla as well, they'll actually do that part for you as well because they also provide solutions for doing your monetization solutions. But the others don't. You'll have to go and do your Apple or your Google Play or whatever to do those, so it's up to you to make sure that they're all talking to each other.
Don't switch yet. I can take over.
Although I'm now going to pass it to Artem, who doesn't want me to switch yet, who can talk about all the other fun with setting up for analytics.
All right, so you've learned the acronyms, ARPDAO, ARPUPU. That was always funny. And now you have lots of questions. Now you start asking, well, how many players log in daily versus, once a week? How many players are paying? How many players are spending, half an hour in the game or longer? Like all of these things as they pertain to game design. So what are your options? Yeah, you can go out and ask a bunch of people, but obviously, yeah, that's very small sample. And you have the cohorts, so you can't actually average things out. You can't. Let's say you had some server component like your database of players. Doing a snapshot and averaging out doesn't tell you anything because all the cohorts are going to be in one big sort of pile, and that's not what you want. You want far more grained, far more detailed control over the parameters and how they relate to different groups of players. So turnkey solutions are great, easy to put in, and they give you basics. For the engagement, they'll log every time someone starts the game. So it's literally that simple. So the SDK you integrate into the game is going to send a packet back to the analytics database, and then when you go into the dashboard, you'll see these events aggregated. You'll see that players are launching it this often and they stay in the game this long. So for the top level KPIs, all of these are competent products. However, when you start going deeper, and when you want to start looking at sort of deeper dependencies, the players who are purchase this weapon, completing missions in 3 seconds flat, so obviously that's a disbalance in the game, and you want to know about that. You probably need to start writing custom queries and sort of working more closely with the data. Most of these products, they will charge you for that. So they're free up until a point, and they make the initial integration very easy, they come with a default set of KPIs. But when you start going a little bit deeper, you'll probably end up paying. The types of things you want to do. When it comes to custom queries, you know, some of these products may not actually let you go too deep with the data because, well, they need to look after their own infrastructure. They don't want one client launching such a complex, obscene SQL query on their infrastructure and stopping all the other clients from accessing dashboard. So that may be, so you may run into sort of, well, blockers if you like. You know, the off-the-shelf solution doesn't do exactly what you need and doesn't give you the flexibility to develop more advanced business intelligence capability. So you may end up building your own. Well, then you definitely need an engineer, or actually a whole bunch of them. And those engineers are going to get very excited because this is really cool stuff. So I don't want to go too deep into the technical side of things. This is not the talk for that, but I'll give you enough, I guess, terminology at least to maintain that conversation in the future when it comes up. Generally, the analytics pipeline will consist of instrumentation piece first. So this is the code that you embed into your game code. So let's say a user bought an item, a weapon, a ship, whatever it may be. Okay, the code should send a packet to the analytics database. User ID, whatever bought in-game item, and then whatever encoding you use. Progression as well. So every time someone completes a mission, every time wins a battle or loses the battle. So basically, my approach to this is instrument as much as possible. It's actually not that expensive these days to send large amounts of data across the internet, and storing them is cheap. Is pretty cheap as well. I guess the problem with instrumentation, if you haven't instrumented something, then later you start looking into an area of the game. If there is no instrumentation, then you won't be able to answer those questions. You can add instrumentation at that point, but by that stage, the cohorts that played your game before instrumentation is put in, well, the insight about those cohorts is lost. They're not going to go back and replay these missions for you. So generally my approach is instrument as much as you can. If something is too noisy, something is prohibitively expensive to deal with on a technical level, then tone it down. So for example, we instrumented every click of the client at some point. I thought, fantastic, we're going to be able to find out everything about users. How many times they opened the dialogue and closed it without making actual selection, or maybe they didn't notice the scroll bar. I don't know. I thought we'll be drawing all these user experience insights, and turns out we can't store this many mouse clicks. so we had to step, even before we could use that data, we had to step back and, okay, we're going to log the actual actions, but not all the clicks that kind of open dialogues and scroll and stuff. So all right, so those events, those game events, you'll probably be encoding them as JSON. It's a very popular format, and you'll probably be talking to some web or HTTP API of the analytics system to basically accept those events and store them safely. If you're building your own analytics pipeline, you'll need an events queuing system, because now you've got so many players doing all these things in their game clients, and their game clients are sending you obscene amounts of data events, like every mouse click there, and you need an efficient way of actually queuing it, because odds are you won't be able to deal with each event as it comes. So you'll need some sort of queuing mechanism that will give you a bit of a buffer. So your processing unit, may take up longer occasionally. The queue should be able to take more events and basically buffer them until the processing unit has a chance to catch up. So we use Apache Kafka in our system. Amazon has a solution called Kinesis, and a very efficient event queue. Okay, you've got the events, you've got them into one pipe, and you're dealing with them. So you'll need to build a data warehouse. That's the storage and analysis piece. Hadoop is an open source, very popular big data solution. It scales really well and gives you, the logo is great. It gives you basically a SQL-like language to write the queries and gain all of those insights. Amazon has a product called Redshift. Again, pretty popular choice. We use a solution called Snowflake. It's a cloud-based data warehouse product. All right. So, what do you do with all that data? Like you've got a ton of it, and you need to kind of make sense of it. It will probably start with an ETL scripts. Basically, extract, transform, load. So the events come in a raw form, and you'll need to basically at least categorize them, because you've got this one big kind of pool of events. So you may want to extract session start events and put them into a session table so that you can more efficiently analyze sessions. Be it time of day your players are more likely to play in, or the session length, or find those, like for example for engagement you may be looking for the players who log in 10 times a day. So in the session table you'll be able to answer those questions efficiently. At least categorize, but sometimes you probably want to transform as well. So you may, like we have, for example, when we log the user actions to do with the ships and fleets, the ship types are basically encoded as this cryptic kind of messages. It's very efficient, right? They're very small, short, and they're unique. The game client looks up assets by using them, and they're small, easy to transport for the analytics purposes. But for data analysts working with the data, they're too cryptic to understand. So you may want to turn them into human readable, friendly names, or you may want to aggregate. So some of the data for future analysis, you may want to start collapsing those individual events, and it probably goes too deep into the data analysis piece, but I'm happy to answer questions later. So inside the data warehouse, you'll need a schema. So star schema is a popular choice. So basically, you've got the fact is the user generally, and then all the different dimensions are your sessions, purchases, missions completed, like things like that. So you start organizing the data in a logical layout. Snowflake, it sort of evolves from there. So you may have users in the middle, and then you may have the missions completed as a whatever branch of the database, and then off that you may have successful completions and failure completions separately. Again, by sorting the data into these buckets, you'll be able to analyze those buckets more efficiently. And the visualization. So when you've written the queries, basically the analyst has to present these insights to design, to product, to all the developers. So we use a product called Tableau. So it's really efficient at graphing big data sets, and you can have the simple line graphs, your pie charts, your geographical. I think it's really cool when you start looking at the geolocation of IP addresses, and sort of you can see the differences and behaviors actually across the countries. Hire data analyst. Well, yeah, I think you're going to hire one. We did not that long ago hired a data analyst for the Brisbane studio. I think it's exciting. I think like for other industries, the business intelligence has been a sort of part of what they do for a very long time, right? So your retail organizations, they have people writing reports and sales projections and whatever. And for the games industry, it's an exciting time. So we're adding DevOps to the skill set of the game development studio, and we're adding data analysis. And unlike the business intelligence community at large, which is primarily looking after the reporting and sort of your quarterly sales figures and whatnot. In games, we do retrospective reporting as well, but we also looking at projections and predictive analytics and basically using the data insight to explain some of the design or explain the user behaviors, inform our design choices, but also implement predictive models. So if we can predict the churn of a player, we can do something about it. If we say, okay, well, this user is about to churn, well, maybe they should get a special offer. Maybe they should get a discount on whatever ship they're struggling to acquire next in terms of progression, and then you keep them in the game for longer, and hopefully you get more value out of that user. So yeah, very exciting times.
All right. So just to sort of follow up on that, talking about in particular sort of breaking that data down and being able to categorize it and all that kind of stuff. Even if you're using a turnkey solution and you're using their dashboards, this is still something you'll want to do, because you're going to be wanting to track where users are at when they're engaged, when they're not engaged, all that kind of thing. And if you can't look at your own data and break that down in a way that's readable for you, you'll probably find that you'll just start hating the analytics solution you've implemented. So analytics works best when you put a bit of forethought into it and think about how you want it. And newsflash, if you're doing it on your own or as a small project, you'll probably do it wrong first. Okay, so just make peace with that, give it a go anyway, and make notes about the stuff. Oh, I should be recording that, or I should have taken that data and broken it apart better here. I need to be able to get a better idea of what's going on in this area. So it's going to be an experimental process. But the beautiful thing about being in a live environment is that you will be doing updates, and as those updates go out, you can then obviously change the way you're measuring. But again, as Arden was mentioning, you've got to remember that any changes you make won't go back into your previous cohorts, and so you need to account for that. So I'm going to talk very briefly about marketing and game design, which for me, having been in the game industry for a while, for a long time I was always like, marketing over there, dev guys over here, we don't really talk to each other. They are some kind of weird black art of people who snort cocaine and go to the pub all the time, and we're the guys working long hours making the game. And it was not until sort of a lot more recently that I sort of realised that aside from the cocaine and the pub visits, game design and marketing have a great deal in common. Which is to say that with game design, you'll come up with a feature that you're interested in your players engaging with, and you need to teach your players what that feature is, why they want to use it, and how they're going to use it. Because if you don't do these things, then why did you bother putting the feature in the first place? So you're selling an experience. You're building an experience, and then you're educating your players into how to engage with that experience, be that through the process of good level design or good tutorial design or whatever it is that is the specific avenue you're taking to make sure that players can engage with the experience. You're making an experience. Well, marketing kind of do exactly the same thing except for the game as a whole, and in particular their way of engaging with players is outside of the game itself. So they're doing the same thing. They're trying to, you've got your game experience as a whole, and they're then trying to educate players into what it is, why they want to engage with it, and how they should engage with it. So that's sort of that moment of realization where those two teams are doing the same thing, but in a slightly different environment. When you move into a live game, you suddenly find that you're doing the same thing in the same environment, which is to say that you've got your players in the game, you've got this data about how they're performing and what they're doing and whether they're churning or not churning or whether they're spending or not spending or whatever it is. You've got activities that they're performing and you've got activities that you want them to perform. So you need to engage with them from that perspective of a marketer, of going, well, how do I convince my players to adjust their behaviour in order to engage with the feature that I wanted? And we talked briefly about intensity versus time graphs and how that sort of comes into behaviour again. So once again, we're looking for that part of the curve, the upturn at the end there, where we're trying to sort of sell that player on the happily ever after moment in their game experience. And the moment that you put it that way, I'm selling the player on it. Well, we're marketing at this point. So for all those people who have looked at marketing as, oh God, I've got to market my game, the main sort of difference between game design and marketing is that marketing involves talking to more journalists. And it so happens that that's where the lines of Coke and the pub visits come in. But, so for all those of you who are thinking of a career shift, just probably don't. But if you're doing the small scale project, you need to be thinking about your marketing, and you need to be thinking about that from the point of view of a game designer. How do I get players to play my game? How do I get them in? And once they're in, how do I get them to engage in the behaviours that I want them to engage in? And like I said, your level design is actually essentially an expression of that. So I'm going to talk a bit more about free play as a whole now. So obviously, VEGA Conflict is a free-to-play game. So this is probably not going to apply to you if you're not making a free-to-play game. So just a couple of things I want to talk about first with regards to free play. Free play is a business model. It's about not being broke. And it's actually not free. You can make a game that's honest to God actually free. Okay? Great. Okay? It's a hobby at that point. Because if you're not making any money off it, it's not a business. So what you're trying to do with a free play game is talking all that stuff about behaviour and talking about sort of measuring and things, is ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to convince at least a small percentage of your players to spend enough money in the game that you can buy milk, that you can pay salaries, you know, all those things that keep a business rolling. So, and you want your players to keep spending. You don't want to get them to spend once, you want them to spend again and again and again. You can also run a business where you get them just to spend once, but if you're going to do that, I suggest making that single spend fairly high, like, say, about $80, which you might notice is about the price that a new game sells for at JB Hi-Fi. So, you know, there's a reason for that. So you want to make sure your players are happy spending money. Now, that's a really interesting one, because happy spending money doesn't necessarily mean that they're sitting there going, take my money, I love you, have money. It's more about making sure that they are happy with the spend that they've made when they've spent it. They might be a little bit begrudging about the fact that they have to part with money at all. Personally, I have enough Scottish ancestry in me that I loathe the very idea that any of my money should go to anybody ever. But you know, at the end of the day, I understand that other people, you know, have to eat as well, and so if I'm going to partake in their services, then maybe they could have, you know, 5 cents or something. And so the same holds true with other people engaging with your product. And so different people will spend at different levels as what's comfortable for them or what their budgets can afford or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's about creating an environment where they are happy with the purchases that they've made. Even if they're happy with it, they'll probably not tell you that they are. If you jump on the forums or wherever when they're talking about it, you will see lots of people who will just be up in your grill about the fact that you're daring to charge money for your service. But the thing there is what they say as you know, angry players in this case, and what they do according to our analytics are two very, very different things. So they'll sit there, you'll get the players who will constantly be sitting there going, you know, I never spend any money in this game. I'm playing this game, I am a free player only, I don't spend a cent. And you go and you have a look at their player ID on the forums, and you look at their player ID in the analytics, and you go, so you've spent $600 worth of not spending a cent to get you interesting. Or you get the other one who's like, oh, you know, I don't mind, I spend whatever, I buy whatever, and then they actually haven't spent a cent. And you're just like, well, why are you saying that? And it's usually to do with how they're interacting with their community. But yeah, very interestingly, depending on how you're doing things in the game, you will get things that people will spend money on and they'll say they want it. One of the things we introduced in VEGA Conflict is the commerce module. And the commerce module is a thing that you can buy within the game, so it's sort of money, spend money only. And once you've bought it, it gives you a constant, very small amount of the in-game currency that you would normally have to spend dollars on, continually for the rest of your time in the game. And the amount it gives you is fairly small. It gives you somewhere around about sort of 5 to 20 cents worth of in-game currency a day, which is, you know, not a lot, but it does it forever. Okay, and the number of players who will say they haven't got it when they actually have is huge. So we like to sort of think of it as a little bit like that Taylor Swift album that none of you own. right? So the key thing with free play is that you have to think free play from the outset. You can't retrofit free play into a game you've already made. It's not as simple as simply bolting a store onto the side of your game and going, hey, we can now do free play. No, you have to build it in, because it comes back to what I was talking about before. You're building these experiences, you're building these stories, you're building this happily ever after moment, and you have to think about that from the get-go. Now, there's a lot of games out there that have made a transition from being not free play to being free play, and there's usually a lot of noise about that and how successful they are. But if you look at those games, you'll notice that most of those games are already most of the way there anyway. Typically speaking, it's a subscription-based MMO that is transitioning to being a free play MMO. But hey, newsflash, if you're subscription-based, you're kind of worrying about things like churn and all that kind of stuff anyway, because your income is based on people repeatedly spending every month on a subscription. So you're changing that repeat spend on a subscription to repeat spend on some kind of consumable or whatever it is within your game. Well, you know, they're kind of most of the way there, right? They haven't taken a game that's got no free play elements whatsoever and turned it into free play. They've turned to take something that's, you know, most of the way there. So you need to build it in from the get-go. And there's a couple of sort of key things you can hinge off: friction, pressure, and hope. So friction is that, this is annoying me, right? It's that a little bit too hard, or it's a little bit too difficult, or it's a little bit too long. It's your grind experience where you're providing an out for people by spending money. Now, that one is very effective, but people do get a little bit resentful of that one. So it's a little bit of a knife edge to walk. It is pretty much the most effective way of getting money out of people, though. Like, if you look at all the sort of different options, you can get a lot out of friction. Pressure is a slightly more interesting one. Pressure is scarcity, it's time limits, it's social pressure, it's all the sort of other things outside of the thing going, well, you know, if you spend, you can have this. It's the limited, 50% off this weekend only. Businesses in the real world, they're not virtual. Like, you're buying some shoes, for instance. You'll notice they run sales and discounts and special offers all the time. That's all pressure. But the one that we can leverage a lot as well is social pressure. And the fashion industry also leverages this as well. It's just that you don't see signs saying social pressure up in the window because, it doesn't quite work that way. But the idea that, I'm in a group of players and somebody else in my group is spending money and I'm, say, riding that. So somebody's bought something in the game that benefits not just themselves but benefits their friends as well. Now, or even like with the party bomb. I don't know if anybody's heard of concepts like the party bomb, which is where somebody buys a thing in the game, they trigger off that benefits everybody except the person who bought it. But everybody who's near them just gets some kind of like, hey, party. The interesting thing about that is that people who are on the reciprocal end of one of those, it generates a social debt to the person who bought it. And that social debt says, well, maybe I should buy one so they can benefit from one as well, because they kind of missed out, right? So they've done this beautiful thing for me. Do I reciprocate? Now, the fun thing about a party bomb, of course, is that one person lets off a party bomb and you've got 8 people who have a reciprocal debt. So it snowballs, right? So you've got to think a lot about those kinds of things as well. And social spend is also a really powerful spend motivator. And then, of course, the final one is hope. I hope I win the lottery. Probably won't, but it'd be awesome. But I got my lottery ticket. Got to be in it to win it, right? So the thing about that is, you're selling. Again, you're literally selling happily ever afters at this point. And the really interesting thing about this one, if you remember back to that vase-like graph with the downturn on it, is that because we're hardwired to look for that happily ever after, you can actually sell the hope of a happily ever after multiple times to the same person without actually giving it to them, which might sound a little bit naughty and a little bit evil. But where this comes in is things like gacha mechanics and things like that. So does anybody know what a gacha mechanic is? You do. What is a gacha mechanic?
It's in Japan, right, where they have those machines where you can put in money and you, get some random thing out of a set of things that you could possibly get from, like that image you have up there, where you pay to get the goldfish, but you can get any number of things.
Yep, exactly. Does anybody here play Magic the Gathering or any other similar collectible card game? I'm not going to ask you again, man. Come on. So they use this. So you go and you buy a booster pack, and a booster pack is guaranteed to contain at least one rare card, 2 uncommon cards, and a bunch of common cards. So when you go and you spend your money, you're buying in the hope that that rare card is going to be the one that you want, that's going to make your deck super amazing awesome. Okay? You buy it, you open it, it's not. It's okay. It didn't say it was guaranteed. I got something cool out of it. I got a rare card. It's not a rare card that I wanted, but I got a rare card. I might be able to trade it or something. But I'll go and buy another one in the hopes that I'll buy another one. And you'll get people who will go and they will go into their hobby shop and they will slap down $100 and say, give me that entire box of boosters, right? Because they know that repeatedly opening them, they've got a higher chance of getting the things that they want. And they'll spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on this because it's the hope. How many people do you think buy lottery tickets every week who don't win? Right? And the answer is enough that the lottery commission doesn't have to pony up the money for the winnings from their own pockets. Right? They've got enough money left over that they can put into all sorts of charitable and less charitable things. So that's sort of the crux of free play. There's a few other things that you need to be aware of if you're going to make a game in the hopes of making some money out of it. Did you want to talk on this one? Or?
Sure.
Okay.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. Yeah, managing SKUs. So what that means is basically everything you sell in an online app, the user actually gets an invoice. So you need to manage all the entries, all the different products. Whether they're swords, coins, new levels, and it's surprising how quickly that list sort of grows and how much effort goes into maintenance of such list. In VEGA Conflict, we sell coins, but then to further motivate the user to buy coins, we often add bonuses to the coins, and basically the number of permutations of different bonuses you can get with your coin purchase is extremely large. So we got away with it by stating that you're actually buying coins. So the coin, or the pack of 100 or 1,000, whatever. And that was what goes onto your invoice. The bonuses are kind of hidden because, well, they're bonuses, so we're not directly sort of accountable for those. But yeah, there's effort that goes into it. The consumer laws in multiple countries. So basically, it gets very convoluted very quickly once you launch globally. Thankfully, these app stores, iTunes and Google Play, hide a lot of the complexity from you, because if the user in Denmark wants a refund for their online purchase, they'll probably be arguing with Apple, not with you. The flip side of that is Apple will simply refund the money, and that comes out of your pocket. And on a lot of these platforms, you can see the number of refunds that are going through, but you don't actually see individual entries. So you can't actually query the user ID or user identity of the person who got the refund. So generally you watch the volume. Basically, if it stays under whatever 10%, I think our tolerance is about 10%. You're doing good. But if there's a much higher percentage, then probably there is a problem with that content, so you need to intervene. Consumables versus non-consumables. So how you classify the online purchase. So if they're coins, then the user will actually spend them in the game, and that's all. That's the end of it. If you sell Magic Sword, however, it's a non-consumable item. It sort of belongs to the user. So these purchases are treated differently on most of these platforms. So, for example, the user who installs the game on a different device, you need to give them an ability to restore that purchase on that device. So you need some sort of tracking of player identities and the online inventory that they have, and it can get somewhat complicated in terms of the APIs involved and the logic for processing there. Apple, Google, Steam. We currently take money on other platforms as well, but these three are the third-party platforms where we manage the SKUs within the platform. So you go into the admin panel of each one and you do the entries One complexity here is price parity. So basically, because the game is cross-platform, if it's cheaper on one platform, guess what? People will buy on that platform. And you may say, well, actually, it doesn't. To us, it doesn't matter as long as we get the same amount. Well, actually, it matters to the other platforms because the users are driven to some other platform. When you start negotiating marketing opportunities with a platform where the game is more expensive, or you'll have less traction. So the rule of thumb is maintain price parity as much as you can. Local currencies. Well, that's where it gets very interesting because you start apart from the logistics of dealing with multiple currencies. Some platforms hide it from you, like Apple with the App Store. Some platforms kind of less prescriptive. So on Google, you can actually define the price of every virtual item you sell for every country, and you assume, I guess, responsibilities for converting your US dollar price into Chilean pesos. But it goes further than that. What is the value of this virtual item you want to sell? So $3 here may not sound much because that's the price of a small cup of coffee. $3 converted into Ukrainian currency, well, actually it buys you quite a lot in Ukraine. So obviously the players are going to be comparing the value of the virtual item with their local price index. And that's where maintaining price parity may become actually quite complicated. Something to manage. I can't say we have the solution. We tried a number of things, and not all of them worked. But it's something to be mindful of if you're going to launch the game globally. Actually, getting your money. I guess.
I can actually talk on this one a bit.
You want to talk about it?
So if you're dealing exclusively with paid purchases through Steam or Google or Apple, the process is actually not that hard. You'll set up your business, you'll have an account with them, they will pay you regularly depending on how much money you're making. Often they'll have thresholds whereby you have to make at least this much money before they'll pass the money on to you. Although they'll usually settle the account at the end of the quarter. So it can be a little bit random if you're sort of riding the low end of the wave. But as soon as you're making more than $100 a month, then you'll get to the point where they'll be paying you fairly regularly. They'll pass to you all the fun of dealing with GST and taxes and all that kind of stuff. They make that your problem, which is great. If you are looking to do this and you haven't got a business accountant who's at least done a bit of the stuff before, make friends with one. Seriously. It gets a little bit more interesting if you're going to start doing advertising within your game as well as a means of getting revenue. So if you're looking to run a banner ad at the top, or you're looking to do offer walls, or you're looking to do sort of incentivized ads and things like that. Because all of a sudden you now find yourself in a business agreement with a whole bunch of different companies. Not just Google and Apple and Steam and whoever, but you're talking to this advertising company and this advertising company and this, and there's a huge smorgasbord of them. And every single one of them will be maintaining a separate account for you. And on top of that, they'll have their own internal negotiated agreements about how much of it goes to you and how much of it gets traded amongst themselves because they're doing, ad-based auctioning or whatever it is that they're doing. And they will invariably each have their own way of wanting to pay you. Some of them will want you to have a PayPal account. Others will want to do it with an international money transfer. Others will want you to physically send them a postal invoice or an email invoice at a regular time and have an account open in the country that they're in. If they're one of those guys, you probably don't want to talk to them because they're probably an American company who thinks that everybody else is in America. But then, you'll run into all these kinds of problems. So just, if you're looking to go into the business side of it, these are things you just need to be aware are going to come down the pipe and you're going to have to deal with as well, on top of all the rest of actually making a game. Because at the end of the day, if your money is sitting in an offshore account belonging to someone else without claiming interest, and you can't pull it back into your account, you actually haven't made any money at all. You've just made somebody else some money. So that's pretty much it. We're at the end. So if anybody has any direct questions now or wants to come and ask us questions more immediately, feel free.
Adam,
Yeah.
You mentioned that you tried multiple strategies for maintaining relatively reasonable and consistent prices. Could you talk about some of the strategies?
Strategies. Well, stripping bonuses off was the biggest one, because initially we thought, okay, let's say you have a package of 100 coins, 1,000 coins, 10,000. That well, it's a finite list, and and you have let's say half a dozen variants of those for different bonus structures. It didn't stop at half a dozen. It was about to explode, so we kind of pared it back to just the packs of coins, and then the internal system deals with all the permutations of with this one you get a free ship, with this one you get a crafting material or whatever it might be. We tried looking at the logistics of actually entering and managing that list. In the previous talk, we were talking about the multiple environments and the sort of extensive testing that we do. So basically, managing that list, well, that's actually times probably 10 or 12 for all the different internal environments we do. So we looked at the automation solutions, ways of sort of maintaining the master list and basically having some sort of script, replicating that product structure on different environments. With Google, doable. They have APIs for everything. They're a great software company. With Apple, not so much. They don't like ideas of an API. We looked at a couple of actually web automation solutions that sort of pretend to be a user of iTunes Connect and sort of click the buttons and stuff. But I stopped. I must say I stopped those initiatives simply because iTunes Connect is basically your interaction with such an important platform vendor. If your automation script goes haywire and you accidentally shut down your production app on iOS, that's not going to be a good experience for anybody. So so we tend to manage manually, and actually those automation experiences led us to the idea of, hold on a second, what if we pare it back? Just a small set of coin packages, and everything else you get is kind of bonuses and extras, and they're divorced from the financial side of things. So on the invoice, it says you got a pack of 1,000 coins. In the game, you got 1,000 coins plus whatever you got. It seems to be the best practice. So we looked at all the highly monetizing games on iTunes and iTunes Store. It works for them. We made the change, and and I actually remember that first Apple submission with the new price structure. We were somewhat nervous, right? We got through submission, and we got through multiple submissions since then. We added different packs of coins since then. So the Apple approval team definitely looked at our purchase product structure, so it worked. But we had to build an internal system to manage all the bonuses.
Just as a quick aside to that, actually, with regards to adding things as a value add on an existing purchase SKU, as opposed to having it as its own defined SKU, if I sell you a spaceship directly, I've actually got an invoice, which is a legal document that says I sold you the spaceship. That then means, coming back to what we were talking about right at the beginning about change and ownership and all that kind of stuff, you now have a legal document that says that you've owned this particular product. So if I then go and change the performance characteristics of that ship because I need to, say, nerf it for game design reasons, you've actually got something bordering on a legal case of sold you something that wasn't fit for purpose. Which then, opens up all sorts of interesting things with regards to how do I handle refunds and all that kind of thing. Whereas if it's done as a value add on top of an existing consumable coin purchase, well, the invoice only says you bought coins. So you can be annoyed about the fact that I've changed it, but you haven't got a legal recourse to the fact that I've changed it, and I'm not then involved in this interesting thing for our lawyers to deal with.
And with the coins, obviously, we build an economy in the game, right? So the user buys coins, and then the coins are exchanged for various things, speed ups and resources and whatnot. Managing internal economy is a massive undertaking in its own right. So it definitely you need very solid foundation with the data analytics pipeline, with your data analysis and data visualization capabilities within the team. It may be too much, right? So the game, your game may be structured differently, and it's an RPG, and all I want is to sell the magic sword or whatever to deal with the monsters with the monsters better. Well, don't sell the sword, sell the token. And I think some games are starting to employ that. So you sell the token is consumable, and the user exchanges it for the sword, and then that sort of steps around that whole issue of consumable versus non-consumable.
Yeah.
And no one's getting a new laptop because we changed the game client.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know more about the cohorts. How do you actually define a cohort, and how do you track them over time?
So the definition for us is we literally just do it based on initial install date. So we'll have like a January cohort, a February cohort, and it's a line in the sand, right? For tracking them over time, all of the data that then gets associated with that user is tied to that cohort. So then, coming back to what Artem was talking about earlier with the building your own analytics engine, because you need to get to that more in-depth information. When you're going in and looking at all of those KPIs and user behavior, you'll usually be picking from specific cohorts that you want to look at and to see how those cohorts are behaving. And that's simply a case of going in and filtering that data based on that initial install date, so that you know that you're looking at somebody of the correct age.
Yeah. Can you generate that data on the fly, or do you have to kind of keep a cohort ID for each player?
No, it's generally on the fly. Generally on the fly, because if you burn the cohort ID, then what if you want to look at it differently? What if you want to slice it sort of differently? Probably there is no need to burn it in, because the generation is fairly simple, right? It could be the month as a digit of the date of the install, or if you want to sort of generate the cohort ID, do it in the ETL. Don't do it in the game, because if you do it in the ETL, if you have a table that with the cohort ID assigned to each player ID, then you can actually change your mind. You can simply change the ETL script, backfill that table from the however long you want to do it for. I guess the implication is actually throughout the entire data pipeline. So you don't calculate the cohort ID in the game, but you may do it in the ETL, but it kind of flows on. So your revenue graph is no longer, sort of two-dimensional days since install, money you've taken from the player, your LTV, right, lifetime value. It's actually there's a third dimension, cohort. So you want to basically, most likely you want to draw by cohort and have the cohort selection sort of widget on the right hand side. So Tableau is really excels for that. In preparation for the talk, I was sort of looking at the open source data visualization frameworks. I found a few. I didn't put any onto the slides is because, I don't have much experience with them at all, and I didn't have time to investigate sort of in detail. But basically the application is keep the days since install or the month of install as a column in those queries where you're looking at all the gameplay parameters. Then you can filter and sort by that cohort. Like sometimes you actually take the results of the query back into Excel. Like that's actually the most available data visualization tool, probably. And you simply filter by month of install, and your graph kind of changes, and that's the way you get a feel for, okay, is our curve improving for recent cohorts? Because that's what you're after, right?
Does that mean you could easily sort of change the definition of a cohort? You could easily just change your query and say, get everyone in different countries?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that's why we don't burn it in. That's why, the game is not aware of cohorts, and most of the ETLs are not aware of cohorts either.
And it may be something that, we talk about months, but it may be we want to see how a cohort after feature X was introduced performs.
Yes.
And there's a hard date to that. So, how do the players, after we put in, we changed the tutorial or whatever it was, see, a player's performing better or worse?
Yeah.
And we can do that
Yeah,
comparatively.
cohort for sometimes cohort is the platform they're playing on, because the user experience is different on iOS, Android, Steam. So you bring that in. Language they play in, is often
location as
well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, usually a mix of all of those. So you'll be looking at iOS players from this state to this state.
Yes.
Yeah.
The takeaway from this is, never look at average, because average or median. If you look at the population of the game as a whole, it's going to average out. Yeah, I don't think it's informative at all. You need to start defining. So just like, I guess, marketing as a discipline, breaks customers into those definitions, right? The males, urban males, or whatever it may be. You always need to look at groups of players, not sort of everyone as a mass.
To expand upon that point, this kind of relates to design. How long would you wait, or how many people would you wait to have the game before you start responding to the analytics?
Statistical
One.
error.
I mean, the thing is, at the moment your game is live, you've got people, as long as your game is being played by people who aren't you, or your friends, or anybody that you know, then you're getting data about how people who have no interest in you personally or your success are responding to the game. If your game's audience is 10 people, then that's your game's audience, and you should be looking at that data.
Yeah, the nature of the analysis changes, right? So when we launched, when we had the version of Unity client ready to run in parallel with Flash, right? We invited a selected group of players into the Unity version. There were, I don't remember how many, 50 of them?
Yes,
no,
a little bit more than that.
Yeah, but whatever the number was, it was small enough for us to actually send them a survey and get your data kind of that way. Obviously the bigger it grows, then it becomes statistically relevant, and that's hopefully you have a data analyst at that point, and they can start looking at the just statistics, basically. Your confidence interval for whatever metric you're analyzing can be calculated, and the insight they provide can be, we can state this with the confidence of 95% versus confidence of 70%.
And depending on what it is that you're adding or you're changing in the game, you may actually see it on one of the DevOps dashboards. So it may well be that we see a spike in concurrency or a drop in concurrency based on what we've done. So it may not be that we may not even have to wait for the analytics to log.
Yes,
that's you sort of see it there, and you're like, concurrency goes like that, and it's like, oh, what did we do? That was good. Or revenue will jump, or revenue will fall, and we'll see various things. When Apple. When Game Center goes down, Apple sadly don't tell you about it, and then we just see a whole load of new installs because people try and launch it on their iPhone and they create a new guest account, and we're like, oh, hang on.
Yeah.
And we see that's an issue. That's not something we get through analytics per se, but
Yeah, and this is quite a few of you stayed from the tech talk to this talk, and and that's where it sort of comes together. DevOps with the infrastructure as code, right? It's a repeatable, scriptable process. So the way you manage your environments, they are instrumented. With the central logging, with the Grafana, with all of those graphs. Well, that's your most immediate feedback on what the players are doing. Like there was a graph earlier when Karen, showed the battle screen and, immediate jump. So that was that's your first insight. That's what your first data insight into the design of that particular whatever you ran in the game, right? You can see that, okay, it grew by 4x. So obviously people are interested in fighting whatever you just launched. So that's your most immediate. Then you've got your Elasticsearch. You can search through the logs. It's really quick. It's really quick. Data analytics pipelines generally have a latency because it happens in the game. The event goes into the queue. Then the queue has a lag. Then ETLs actually can be quite involved. Just the transformations you need to do to make the data. Then it goes into the big data store, Hadoop, Redshift, whatever it may be. There will be a latency there because that data warehouse needs to re-index some tables and make it available for querying. Your queries, again, the way the data is partitioned, if you're looking for battle events inside this big dirty table that has all the events from the game for that day, like if you slice it by day, then it may actually take 20 minutes to return. By that stage, well, the situation has changed. So you look at sort of different ways of collecting and accessing data.
As for how early you start collecting, just from my own experience, just doing small indie projects, using like a turnkey solution and getting that implemented even long before you're in and having that running.
Yes.
When I was doing just bus stop testing, taking devices with builds around and just giving them to random people to play, me and my business partner, we would both be doing that individually. All of those had the analytics stuff set in. It was logging data. It was tracking events. It was tracking how people engage with tutorials or engage with the various different aspects of the game, and session lengths, all those kinds of things. And that data then, the next day, we were able to sit and pore through it and look at where our game was falling over, where it wasn't, all that kind of stuff, because we'd collected that data even before. This was all obviously from device IDs. Obviously all this data just came back from 2 device IDs because that's what we had for doing our testing. But it didn't change the fact that data was super useful. So start now.
And the really short answer is rule of thumb is 10,000. Then a lot of it. Well, now that we've explained all the complexity behind it, but if you're looking at the really high level KPIs, your ARPDAU, ARPPU, whatever it may be, 10,000 would be the minimum. If you have less than 10,000, most of the aggregations are not going to be statistically relevant.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if a player buys a non-consumable item in game, is there any way can they lose it? Like, can they have it taken off them? Or?
No. Once they've bought a non-consumable item, that transaction is recorded either at the Apple or the Google level as something that they have bought. If they go for a refund on that item, then obviously that transaction gets undone at Apple or Google's level.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to you then to be able to respond to that. But once that transaction has happened, then that's stored against their Apple account or their Google account forever. And then with Google, I think it's automatic, but with Apple, you need to provide them with a way to restore purchases, and then you need to be able to provide that to them again, which is actually another risk of the non-consumable, is that once it's sold, you have to be able to cater for that particular item for the rest of your game's history. The flip side of that is that people prefer buying non-consumables because
other than the sold token, right? If you sold the token, then you can, they exchange the token, and then you can, they can break the sword or something.
Yeah.
The decision to do it that way, is that purely based on the way the store works, or is it a game design issue?
Bit of both.
Well, for us, we knew we're going to be building an economy. So this wasn't the first game for KIXEYE, and when we started with the VEGA, we were kind of following the design philosophy, if you like, at that point. So we knew we'll be building an economy, we'll be building in-game currency.
For non-consumables, as long as you know that there's no danger of those changing, then you're good to go. So a good example would be, a good example of non-consumable is non-consumable, I'd like to buy no more ads in my game, please. Right? It does what it says on the tin. It's not actually related to your game design at all. So it's a really safe thing to sell. The other one, like if you look at, say, Crossy Road, each of their little characters in that are all non-consumable purchases because they know that they're never going to strip those out. And the actual impact that they have on the gameplay is so minimal that they don't have to worry about, if they need to change their game design to rebalance any aspect of their game. None of the characters that they're selling alter that. The gameplay itself is not linked to the character. So again, that's a safe thing to sell. As soon as you're selling something that's going to directly interact with your game design, that's when it becomes very risky to sell it as a non-consumable.
So what I'm hearing is instead of rolling back the base, we should have sold it back to them.
Yes.
Okay, good lesson. Thanks.
We have more experience now.
Yeah.
So your commerce module would count as a non-consumable, wouldn't it?
No.
No.
The reason being is because we don't sell it as an IAP item. We sell it within our own internal store for coins. So you buy a consumable coin pack and then you exchange those coins for the commerce module. Very similar to the sword token versus the actual sword.
So have any of your games had non-consumable purchases in them? Have you always gone consumable?
Well,
For VEGA, it's always
For VEGA,
been
it's
consumable.
always
I don't think there's been any in the other games.
Even back at Monsters, I think they introduced Shiny.
Yeah.
So all the games that followed had internal like in-game economy from the start.
I think we've been up here for a while now, so thank you all.
Thanks very much.